homeless because of immorality. They're not homeless because they want to be. They're homeless because we live in a country that does not care.
The National Coalition for the Homeless has been around for many years, and we're a group that has been dedicated from day one to ending homelessness.
Good afternoon, everybody. We want to welcome you to the Ending Homelessness in America Challenges and Solutions briefing. We are here today because we are at a point in this country where homelessness is at an uncontrollable level. We have known for a long time that homelessness was growing in America, and we needed a dramatic impact from Congress to be able to change that direction. And today we want to really dig deep into some of the causes, some of the underlying issues, and some of the structural challenges that we face as homeless advocates in America. So we have a distinguished panel that we'll bring to you today. Our goal today is that we want everyone in this room to go away with the understanding that we have that for the many people that are homeless in America, and it's so hard to quantify what that number is, it's not a choice. They are forced into streets, into tents, into shelters, into buses, under abandoned automobiles and in abandoned buildings, are living doubled up or in temporary facilities with their families. And it's due to a lack of a comprehensive federal affordable housing and job strategy. We have a homeless emergency in America, and it must be addressed by Congress now. We have had 4 distinct periods of homelessness in this country in its history. Each of those periods has been followed by a comprehensive solution that was directed by members of Congress. Unfortunately, this current period of homelessness, this current episode, which started in the late 70s, early 80s, is the longest in the history of this country. And what we have not seen, with what we have seen in other periods, and we've not seen this time, is that dramatic impact operation from our federal government. We have not seen a comprehensive response this time. There's no Social Security, there's no job program that would inflect the kind of resources necessary to change the trajectory of homelessness. And we've also seen, for one of the first times in our history, a lack of a compassionate response by many cities, even some of our more progressive cities in this country. In 65 communities, we are seeing a growth of anti-homeless criminalization laws that make it, in some cases, in Tennessee, for instance, an actual felony to be homeless. And remember, homelessness is not people's choice. Homelessness is something that is brought upon by a lack of a structural response. And so we are here today to bring as much understanding as we can to that issue and ask members of Congress and their staff for the support in finding true solutions. We thank those who have already presented solutions, and we'll be talking about a couple of what we think are very promising bills that we hope you'll consider if you're member, or if you are a member, haven't signed on to, we hope you do. We'll be talking about Maxine Waters' Ending Homelessness Bill, the resolution from Representative Cori Bush that would bring about a homeless Bill of Rights so that we see people's rights protected. We call for a elimination of the Faircloth Amendment because we want to build affordable housing in this country. You know, that's the solution to homelessness. So we thank you all for being here. We have a wonderful panel today, and they'll go a little deeper on some of these issues. And I just wanted to announce some of that panel that we have here today. We have Dr. Rajni Shankar Brown, the professor and endowed chair of social justice education at Stetson University, and also the president of the board of directors of the National Coalition for the Homeless. On our panel today, we also have Susie Shannon, the policy director for Housing as a Human Right in Los Angeles, and also the chair of the Democratic National Poverty Council. Ann Oliva, hopefully will join us today. She's the CEO of the National Alliance to End homelessness. Sarah Sadian, she's the Senior Vice President of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Neli Vazquez Rowland, the founder and president of a safe haven in Chicago, Illinois. James Fukuda, the National Finance Chair of LULAC and the ED of Practice of Peace, and also a member of the NCH Board of Directors. Kristina Garcia, the Vice President of the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, and also the Vice President of the NCH Board of Directors. Dr. Lamont Green from the Seattle Homeless Committee, and also NCH Board Director. Rashima Melson, who's the National Campaign Consultant for the Bring America Home Now campaign, and Joel John Roberts, the ED of PATH Ventures, a statewide program in Los Angeles, California. So first on our panel, we're going to start with the group that's here with us today. And we thank them for being here. We thank all of you for being here and your commitments to ending homelessness in America. We want to recognize our Bring America Home campaign chairperson, who was one of you at one time. He's a former member of Congress. He a former member of a congressional staff, worked for a very long time with Representative John Conyers. Joel Segal, thank you for being here. And a special thank you to the chairwoman, Waters, and her staff. Melissa Noah, I know, is here with us today. Thank you so much for providing the space in the People's House for us to talk about this very important issue. So I'm going to start with our panel that's here today, and I'm going to ask each one of you, as I call your name, to come up and speak. So on our panel, we have, as I mentioned before, Susie Shannon, who I've introduced already. We also have James Fukuda, who also was introduced earlier. We have Bob Elrich from
Marc Elrich.
I'm sorry, Marc Elrich, excuse me.
Former governor.
Former governor candidate. Do you have more you want to share about your resume? So he will share a little bit about. He also was I believe, official in Prince George. I'm sorry, Montgomery County. Gosh, please forgive me. Not enough coffee this morning. And we also have Onora, who is a policy staff person at the National Coalition for the Homeless, who will be presenting our legislative platform. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to first introduce. Okay. So we may have actually the actual president of LULAC, Domingo Garcia, in our waiting room. If he is there, why don't we bring up Domingo Garcia on Zoom? So this will be a hybrid presentation. So we have our panel here, but most of our panelists are actually going to be presenting from Zoom. So if we could now have Domingo Garcia, who is the president of the League of United Latin American Cities, or LULAC. So if we could bring Diego up to speak.
Hello. Hello, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to y'all today. My name is Domingo Garcia. I'm the national president of LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the nation's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organization, founded in 1929. I'm actually talking to y'all today from Uvalde, Texas, the site of one of the most horrific tragedies in recent history regarding what happened with a shooter who killed a lot of children. And we're here helping some of the families deal with that issue and the aftermath of that, as well as the community. But today I want to talk to you about housing and the lack of affordable housing for Latino communities throughout the United States and Puerto Rico. The fact of the matter is what we're seeing is the lack of affordable housing, not only because of the failure of the private sector to create and build affordable housing, but also because of gentrification. In city after city, I'm based in Dallas, Texas, we are seeing that affordable housing, Latino neighborhoods, like in West Dallas, those houses are being torn down, replaced by apartments and condominiums, and that gentrification is destroying affordable housing throughout not only Dallas, but Austin and cities throughout the United States, and that's not being replaced. So what happens is you get homeowners who get taxed out of being able to afford their homes because of the gentrification. They sell, they cannot afford to buy another home. And as a result, they become renters. So we're seeing almost a tale of two cities. We're seeing middle and low income working class Latinos and African Americans primarily, who are basically being changed from homeowners to renters in a period of a generation. And this is occurring throughout the United States. And in effect, there is no local or national, state or national policies in place to protect these homeowners, to freeze tax rates so that they don't increase as gentrification raises tax rates. So that $100,000 home is now about $300,000 or $400,000, but it's the same $100,000 house they bought, but now their taxes have doubled or tripled, and they're put into a financial squeeze regarding whether they keep their home, pay the taxes, or sell, but then not be able to afford another house anywhere else. So it requires national and state and local attention to adopt policies to deal with this gentrification, the destruction of affordable homes. In Dallas County, in the city of Dallas, if you take down an old tree, you have to build a new one. But if you take down an affordable house, it might be an older house, you don't have to build another affordable house. That is just so wrong on so many levels. And we see this happening over and over across America. And whether it's HUD or whether it's the private sector or whether it's the redlining by banks that basically prohibits and doesn't give loans by intent to Black and brown people across America, the impact is the same, is that the ability, that American dream of home ownership has become something only of a dream. When I was a member of the Dallas City Council when I was 31, and I believed home ownership was a way to create wealth for low-income communities. And we destroyed an apartment complex and we built 100 new homes that were about between $75,000 to $130,000. And we created a financial way to get them in with no down payment. That's the last new housing, affordable housing in Dallas, and that was in the 90s. But this same situation plays out across the country. So we need a new housing strategy to create affordable housing, home ownership. The days of the projects and people being put in housed and those type of situations, I think is over. The only way you can empower and enfranchise people with the American dream and with net worth is by giving them the opportunity to have their own home that they own, they take care of. When's the last time you washed your rental car? Probably never, right? Because it's not yours. But if it's your car, you probably take the car wash every way. Same thing happens when you have homeowners. Same thing happens when you have neighborhoods that are full of homeowners. They take care of their neighborhood. That means they take care to make sure that there's no gang activity, no criminal activity, that the houses are cleaned up and they're taken care of. And so those middle-class neighborhoods in Latino and African-American communities are slowly and gradually whittling down. And the growth that we saw in the I guess the 2000s, we've seen that there's backward steps being taken now. And I hope that this committee and the speakers address those issues here in the future. Thank you very much. Y muchísimas gracias.
Our next speaker is from another national organization. Christian Nunes is the president of the National Organization for Women. Christian Nunes, or now.
Thank you very much, Donald, for having me here today. Good evening, good morning to everyone. Good afternoon. I'm coming in virtually from Denver, so I'm glad to be here with you all today and talk about this important issue regarding ending homelessness and helping provide safe, affordable, and sustainable housing for our families and community members. I'm going to speak briefly to the point of why housing is a feminist issue and an issue regarding women and children. A lot of times when we think about homelessness and we think about the face of homeless individuals, we don't think about women and children. And we have to change what that looks like. And we have to change this because it also will help us redirect how we perform legislation and how we write legislation and our policy. Because truly, when we look at it, women and children are disproportionately representing homelessness, the homeless population. And we know that when you look at reports, there was a report released by UN Women and the UN Development Program, and they state in 2022, there's estimated 388 women and girls living in extreme poverty compared to men who are about 372 million. And we also know that 70% of the poor are women and children, and 35% of those are living in America. So it's a large, for us to be an industrialized country, the home that everyone wants to come to, the country everyone wants to be a part of. We have majority of our children and women that are living in poverty, and those are single mothers that are 35% are living in that extreme poverty here. And so we also know that women are ones who are essential workers. They are frontline workers. They are the ones that were hit hardest by COVID recession. And yet they have still not fully bounced back from the recession. We have issues with childcare. We have issues with childcare parity, family medical leave parity. And so as we're depending on women to help us continue to drive forth our economy and our government, we are not meeting them with the needs they need to be able to provide fair and adequate housing for their families, to be able to be safe and thrive and effective and live safely. And so one of the big issues is that we're talking about here is the Fair Cloth Amendment and why it's so important that this issue needs to be repealed. If we really think about this, this is like a human rights issue. This is about equity. This is about justice. Why would we be in a country where we are going to eliminate the issue of funding new public housing when we have been here and we have the funds and we have the space and we have the funding? So we have to really look at what we're doing and what messages we're communicating when we refuse to repeal the Fair Cloth Amendment, which will really provide adequate and safe housing, public housing for all families to be able to live and be safe and to be in safe places. And also just supporting the End Homelessness Act when we're looking at how we are positioning our value system and what we believe in and what we're thriving for. We need to let people know that we truly believe in our constituents and our families and everyone. And this is why now, as involved in this issue, we are based on an intersectional approach, and we really believe, working with National Coalition for Homelessness and other coalition partners, that this is a holistic issue. We have to all be in solidarity in homelessness. So this cannot be a siloed issue, and we must work together fully to do so. These issues are intertwined with economic justice, racial justice, ending violence against women. All of these things overlap when we're talking about what contributes to homelessness for women and girls. And so we must make sure that as we're moving forward, and I hope that these issues will come up for solutions, that we're looking at it from an intersectional perspective to make sure that we are addressing a legislation and policy that will look at it from this framework and look at the disconnects. But part of it has to be having conversations with those who are directly impacted. So I just want to give my little quick tidbit on this, and I look forward to the outcome of what this congressional briefing will have. And I thank you all for taking the time to just hear from now and be a part of this congressional briefing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christian Nunes. And our next speaker, we will have members of Congress who will join us as we go through the briefing today. And as they come in, we'll bring them to the podium. Our first member of Congress is Jimmy Gomez, who represents the 35th Congressional District in Los Angeles. Representative Gomez.
Good afternoon. First, let me just thank all of you for being here. Housing is a human right, the National Coalition, Homelessness Now. This is an issue that a lot of folks would often think is just a blue state issue, a blue city issue, but it's not. It's something that is occurring across the country because we've had a historic underinvestment in housing, a historic underinvestment in mental health, a historic underinvestment in working people. And when I was in Salt Lake City, what was the number one issue they were talking about? The unhoused individuals and the tents that they're living in Salt Lake City. Sherrod Brown has started talking about from Ohio about how this is a number one issue and it's a growing issue. So it's not just a blue state issue. It is an American issue that goes from the West to the East and from the North to the South. And we have to have a national strategy to address it. We have to also put our money where our mouth is, where our heart is. We have to have investment. But this is not going to be solved overnight. This is something that we have to have a collective reckoning when it comes to this issue. And it's coming because it is not something that's going to be going away. It's something that we have to deal with. I live in I represent the 34th Congressional District, which is in downtown LA. It has Skid Row as part of my district. It is, and LA's policy to deal with housing was sprawl, just build out as far as the eye could see. And when you run out of space, start sending people to Arizona, Nevada, and all the other surrounding states. And the way they dealt with individuals that were unhoused was the strategy of containment. Put them in one area, keep them there, put the resources there so they don't move anywhere outside of that area. Oftentimes in Skid Row, there was no, people weren't living in around that area. That changed as the property values went up, cost of living went up, and the ability to the city electeds to keep people and the county to keep people contained broke down. So that wasn't dealing with the problem. That was just containing the problem. So now we have to develop a strategies and funding that really deal with the root causes, making sure people don't go into homelessness, right? That's why the child tax credit was so important. The child tax credit cut child poverty from anywhere from 40 to 60%, depending on where you lived. Everybody, I've heard a Republican say that we had historic lows of poverty in this country before the pandemic. If it was historic lows, then how can two little policy changes to the child tax credit cut poverty even further, right? So that is what we have to start thinking about. How do we get the most resources to the people who are most in need, and how do you have the biggest bang for your buck? And these experts here have seen it all. They know a lot of the problems. So now we also have to make sure we deal with strategies, getting people off the streets, getting them the care that they need, making sure that we care for individuals who having mental health issues, drug abuse issues, but also recognizing that there's different populations on the streets. LA is at the epicenter, but it's not a blue state. It's not a blue city issue. It's an American issue. So I hope you guys have a good debate, a good discussion, push, question, and then hopefully we'll achieve better answers together. So with that, thank you to the panelists for all being here. And thank you, Susie, who's a good friend of mine and is somebody that I call when I need some advice on some of the federal policies and local policies. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Representative Gomez, for taking the time to be here. We really appreciate you for today and your work that you've done throughout the years on this issue. The Bring America Home campaign is a comprehensive campaign which includes all sectors of the population, from elected officials to advocates to people with lived experience themselves, the faith-based community. So we hope to bring together all of those that care about this issue to push for comprehensive solutions. So our next speaker is from the faith-based community. He is the Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler from the Union Presbyterian Seminary. He is the director of the Center for Social Justice and Reconciliation in Charlotte, North Carolina. Dr. Sadler.
Thank you so very much, Donald, for all the work that you do, for these constant efforts to try to end homelessness in America. Joel Segal, thank you for your incredible vision in this regard. It's said that a lawyer asked Jesus what the greatest commandment was. Without thinking, Jesus quoted Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, and your strength. And then he added Leviticus 19:18b, and to love your neighbor as yourself. You see, when asked what the greatest commandment was, Jesus could not offer just one. In essence, he was affirming that you could not say that you love God and not show your love for people as well. Any so-called religious profession of affection for God that does not include concern for those made in God's image was deemed hollow. Better put, those who love God must also love their brothers and sisters. As we look at the obligation to love our neighbors, we realize that this is more than a demand for affection. The call to love them as we love ourselves is a call to care for them as we would care for ourselves. It means that if we see them unhoused, unfed, uncared for, with needs unmet, we should meet their needs as we would meet our own needs. That is what love means. It means doing good on behalf of those who need it and attending to their needs with the same vigor with which we would attend to our own needs. What Jesus said, following Moses, predicting Muhammad, actually offering a golden rule, an instruction found in almost every faith tradition, is that we have an obligation to care for each other. It is an obligation grounded in our relationship with God. It is an obligation to do for others that is partnered with what we should do for our God if our God were here. It establishes the notion that human beings live in a mutual dependency with each other, a interwoven network of dependency, as Dr. King said. As we look at the housing crisis in America, we should note that as people of faith, we are called to focus on the housing of those unhoused as if we were unhoused ourselves. It is fundamentally important to house unhoused people. It is not just a charge on individuals or on individual charity, i.e., give a little bit of money to someone so that they can get a place to stay for a night. It is a call to do justice, i.e., work together to ensure that our systems are fair, that people have the wages they need to afford housing, and that housing is viewed as a human right. As an interfaith community, we need to focus on fostering changes in the system that would ensure that no one has to live without access to adequate housing. So as we come here today, I call on Congress to step up to the plate and to address this issue head on. We need to eliminate the Faircloth Amendment. If we really are the richest nation in the history of the world, if we really are the greatest nation that humanity has ever known, then we should commit ourselves to ensuring that no child of God, made in God's image, that no human being, regardless of their color, their background, their nation of origin, their mental health status, their gender or orientation, or anything else about them, that no human being should ever be left without a place to call home. If we truly love God, if we truly love our neighbor, then we will end homelessness and bring America home right now. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadler. And our campaign, as I said, is a comprehensive campaign, and we know that the federal government alone can't end homelessness. We need people at the state level, at the city level, at the county level, if we're truly going to have a comprehensive end to homelessness and bring America home now. So our next speaker, and I do apologize for my first introduction of him, but we're really glad to have the former Montgomery County Executive, Marc Elrich, who is also a candidate for the governor of Maryland. Thank you so much for being with us today, and really appreciate your willingness to be here.
Okay, thank you. So I'm actually the current county executive of Montgomery County, and I'm running for re-election as county executive of Montgomery County. Bob Ehrlich was the former governor of Maryland, and he was a Republican, which I am not. But I'm happy to be here today, and I want to start like when I was a young person in my late teens and had read way too much Jack Kerouac. I got interested in going out and talking to people in the shadows, and I would go up to New York and I would go to the Bowery and I would put a bottle of Tokay in my jacket and I would sit with people who were homeless on the Bowery and I would talk to them. And the first thing I realized about this was that for all the stories, people always assume that these are crazy people, they're out of control. I would talk to people who would talk about the families they had lost, the jobs they had lost, the lives they had lost, the regret they had for what they had done, the regret over their inability to find a path back. And what I found were really whole human beings who were trapped in a system for which they would get no help. And when I went out to Denver, because I was following Kerouac's trip across the country, I stopped at the railroad station, Union Station there, and sat and had the same kind of conversations. And it didn't matter where I went. I found this kind of human being who was in the same place the rest of us were. And I always think of that folk song, There But for Fortune. You lose a job, you do something dumb and you wind up unemployed, you repair a car and don't make the rent payment. All these things that lead a person down a path that can be very difficult to escape from. I've been executive for 3 years, and I was on the county council for 12 years before that. And when I first got on the council, we talked, we were going to have this program to end homelessness. And we didn't actually do it. But we bit off pieces of it. We ended veterans homelessness pretty much effectively. We've done the same for family homelessness, but we still, even recently, had more than 400 people, and our shelters were temporary. For the most part, you came in the cold months, you were on the street the rest of the time. We would kick you out in the morning and you'd be on your own, and you could come back in the evening for dinner. And that was our program. And as we went into COVID, we recognized this population was extremely vulnerable. And of course, because of their presence on the street, also vector for being able to spread COVID. And so we put people in a couple of our rec centers and basically took pretty much everybody off the street who was willing to go off the street, which gets to another problem. But most of the people on the street went off the street. And about a year ago, a little over a year ago, we were talking about the fantasy of when COVID is over. And I asked my staff, so what happens to the people we've got in our rec centers now when we decide we're opening up the rec centers again? They said, you're going to put them back on the street? And they said, yeah, because there wasn't anything else to do. So I looked at my general services director and I said, find a building, build me a center for a couple hundred people so we could keep the people who we housed and we wouldn't put them back on the street. And by September, he had found the building and developed plans. And by March, we opened up a building that houses 200 people. Now it's still congregate. They're in smaller rooms. They have actual beds though, no more of the bag on the floor where you're sleeping on your clothes. They have a dresser underneath the bed. They've got a plug with 2 USB ports so they can plug their phones in and charge them up, which a lot of people have. And it's helping us keep people off the street, but it's all congregate. And so in this budget, the one I'm putting together now, we're actually proposing, we're going to buy a building, probably a motel, and we're going to create about 100 living spaces, private living spaces, so that people can transition. Not everybody is ready to transition just because you reach out to them. And I will say our staff put about 2,000 people into permanent housing during COVID who had lost their housing. That's pretty substantial over 2 years, and I'm really proud of the work they did. But I want a system where we've got a congregate shelter for those who need it. And I will tell you, when we talked about putting people in hotels, there was many of the providers said, don't do that, because you can't control what goes on behind the closed door, and you're trying to control COVID, and this would not be good for that if that's what you're trying to do. And so we've got this congregate shelter, but I do want a shelter that provides that second step, which is probably the last step before people who need some transition help are ready to get into their own housing. So we see a path forward, and we think we can build that path. But I'll tell you, earlier today, I stood in front of a group of affordable housing developers, and I was really glum. I did my best to depress them about Montgomery County's affordable housing situation, because we talk a good game. You know, we have this thing called moderated price dwelling unit program that serves primarily teachers and firefighters. That was what they said back in the day. I have 6,700 units left in a county of 1.1 million people. And here are the statistics on the other side: 50,000 households earning less than $50,000 who are spending 50 to 60% of their incomes on affordable housing. A projection that of the next 40,000 households that come to Montgomery County by 2030, 30,000 of them will require subsidy. And 2/3 of that 30,000 will have incomes below $50,000. We don't build housing for these people. We don't. And they said that we would lose also by 2030, 11,000 of our existing naturally occurring affordable housing units. It was 44,000 in 2000. It's about 22,000 today. We'll lose another 11. And my point to them was, we don't do anything about any of this. We have watched this place slide away. We've watched people lose their housing. And the broadest call for housing in Montgomery County is build more housing, build more housing. And it's like, it matters what you build. It's not, if I build 40,000 market rate units, first place, there's apparently not demand for 40,000 market rate units. But the people who aren't market rate aren't going to be able to afford those units. So if you don't have deliberate policies to build housing at the price that people can afford to get into with subsidy when needed, then these folks will not find a place to live. And so as I look at, one of the questions that came to me was, what would you do? Well, first of all, you need a comprehensive affordable housing program that serves everybody. I had a conversation today about we need a complete community strategy. We have a complete street strategy. I want a bike lane, I want a bus lane, and I want 2 car lanes, and I want a park lane down the middle. We need a complete community strategy. We require 15% of new development to be moderately priced, 15%. So in Bethesda, you build $4,000 apartments and you build 100 of them, and I get 15 out of 100 that'll be affordable to somebody making between $60,000 and $70,000. Oddly enough, nothing, not only nothing below, but nothing for people who can't afford a $40,000 unit, $4,000 unit, and make too much money to live in a $75,000 unit. So we've kind of messed this thing up on both ends. And so what I'm going to propose is that we do a complete community where every developer has to build within their building a range of affordability from 30% of AMI up to 100% of AMI, so I can house the people who are not being housed. And I know they don't want these people living in their buildings, which is why they'll pay us not to require them to put them there. But I've also told my people to stop accepting payments in lieu of putting affordable housing in these buildings, because all we're doing is segregating the community. Developers have figured out how to build vertical country clubs because they pack the building so full of amenities, the party room on top, the sauna, all those things, that they have to give me moderately priced dwelling units at $200 or something thousand a unit, but the condo fee is over $1,000. And then it's so sad, these tenants just can't afford the condo fee. So let me give you $133,000 a unit and go away. I can't buy a unit for $133,000. So we need a much more aggressive policy. We need to make sure that what gets built starts looking like the rest of the community. We have to have the courage politically to stand up against the people who fund people's campaigns or will fund their future campaigns. I'm not confused. I'm in a county where most of us are publicly financed, but if your future aspirations are what many people's are, then you still take money from developers who will give you your 250 and then have the voters amplify 250 to 850. So I don't even take money from developers, period, because I don't want the public paying to increase the developer contribution. That just seems perverse to me. So we do need these different policies and need a different approach. We need more job training. Our schools have to do a better job. I mean, we throw away Black and brown children like they're disposable. The fact that we have failed to educate these kids for decades is amazing. When I hear people talk about we need to import talent from whatever other country outside the United States because we don't have it here. The question is, we're throwing away so many people. Why don't we grow our own talent? Why am I satisfying the demand for talent by stepping outside our borders instead of raising up the people who are inside our borders and making sure they get the education they need so they can provide the talent we need? We need more mental health support. The largest mental health institution in Montgomery County is our jail. Over 30% of the people in the jail have mental health issues, and they technically, legally are not supposed to be put in the jail, but they're put in the jail because we don't have beds in any other facility because the state will not support beds at the scale we need to have beds. And we do have to overcome, I was a foster parent, and I have kids that came out of institutions. And deinstitutionalization was good for some people. It was a disaster. My kids were manageable. I didn't have to worry about, was I going to grow too old to handle this? I can handle it. But for other people, their kids get older and they become more and more challenged. They suffer more and more mental illness breakdowns. And not having shelter and not having any institutions, I think, is a step too far. And I deal with homeless people on the street who are out there in the freezing cold, not taken care of at all, and they're going to kill themselves. And to not be able to get a ruling that this person should be taken off the street and put into a decent facility is a real problem. And I know there are advocates who are saying nobody should be institutionalized. I don't see how that's humanly possible unless you're content to let people just die on the streets, which I have a hard time accepting. So that's my 2 cents on this. I really appreciate what you're doing. And I know the work that everybody here came to talk about is really, really important. You all have souls. You actually care about what happens to people in the world. And it's good to be in a room full of people like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Executive Elrich. Thank you so much for all that you do. And for those that don't know, Montgomery County is a model for the rest of the country with some of the programs they've implemented. And I know that the leadership of County Executive Elrich has been really responsible for much of that. And thank you for your service as a foster parent. That's incredibly important in our country. So as we move along, we are about to have, before we go to, again, our distinguished panelists, we're going to have a short presentation. It's a PowerPoint presentation presented by our policy analyst, one of our senior policy analysts at the National Coalition for the Homeless, Adaora, Onora.
And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Adaora Onora, as Donald mentioned, and I'm one of the senior policy analysts for the National Coalition for the Homeless. I've spent the last few years working on closing the gaps through which people fall into homelessness by addressing regulatory and legislative policy. So in other words, I'm personally invested in this important issue. So on behalf of NCH, I'd like to officially welcome you to the Ending Homelessness in America Challenges and Solutions briefing. So why are we here? The answer to that question lies right outside of our homes, under bridges and tents, and near the same highways and streets that we take to get to work. The truth is, homelessness has become so much more of a crisis in our country than it ever needed to be. The problem is that sometimes we choose to turn a blind eye towards homelessness, but it never really goes away. In fact, it's now one of the most serious issues we stand to face as a country, only being amplified by the pandemic. With that being said, the federal government does have a process called the point-in-time count. It involves communities sending volunteers out to physically count people who are homeless and on the streets one day a year. You can imagine that it would be difficult to gain an accurate accounting of every homeless individual in this way, especially during COVID-19. But by using this process, HUD provides a 2-part annual homeless assessment report to Congress. The report offers data that we can use to compare trends year to year. And in this data, we see alarming increases in family, youth, and individual homelessness. Now, before we go over statistics, I just want to remind you all that people experiencing homelessness are more than just numbers. They are mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, uncles, aunts, sons, and daughters. Their experiences and trauma related to becoming homeless, their journey to seeking support to end their homelessness, and their daily struggles to live in safety could never be accurately depicted with numbers. Instead, we want these numbers to bring light to a very pressing issue that's been swept under the rug for far too long. On a single night in January 2020, there were 580,466 people experiencing homelessness in the US. And in 2021, there were more than 326,000 people experiencing sheltered homelessness in the US. It's important to note that within the sheltered homeless population, 40% of those individuals that live in shelters or between family and friends' couches are working class people. Unfortunately, they are not being compensated a living wage within our inflated economy to afford a place to live. The other shocking data point comes from the US Department of Education, which tallies the number of US children who are homeless in America's public schools. This figure has swelled to 1,280,886 children. It's necessary to understand that over the past 5 years, homelessness has steadily increased by 8.5%. Extremely low income renters in the US face a shortage of approximately 7 million affordable and available rental homes. Because of this, only 1 in 4 households eligible for housing assistance even receives it. Homelessness needs to be addressed now, and we have a few recommendations for how to achieve the goal of ending homelessness once and for all. Prior to moving on, I would like to direct your attention to the disclaimer that due to disruptions with the COVID-19 pandemic, that unsheltered point in time counts were not possible in several communities in 2021. As a result, the data released by HUD in February 2022 does not account for an estimated 40% of the homeless population that are actually unsheltered on a given night. Instead, it is focused exclusively on populations experiencing sheltered homelessness. As we dive into those recommendations, I'd first like to take some time to thank Congress for passing the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act, which codifies the regulatory initiative Foster Youth to Independence, as well as all other initiatives implemented to end homelessness. That action on the part of Congress expanded the Family Unification Program to end homelessness for youth leaving foster care. I was able to identify and help to fill these gaps because I viewed the system from the inside out. I was actually in the foster care system and aged out at 21. I'm also intimately familiar with HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Program, the Family Self-Sufficiency Pilot Program, and the Section 8 Home Ownership Program. I'm very proud of the work that's been accomplished to end homelessness for emancipating foster care youth, as it's been monumental to giving the youth, our future, a much needed stepping stone in a world where they already have no choice but to face adulthood alone. It is our wish that Congress will continue to keep that momentum in the mission to end homelessness for all through the Ending Homelessness Act of 2021, as well as other supporting bills to make this vision a reality. Chairwoman Maxine Waters' Ending Homelessness Act of 2021 moves the nation towards a complete universalization of HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Program. And why? Because she was a social worker. She understands not only on an economic level, but a personal one as well. This bill would end homelessness and significantly reduce poverty in America by transforming the Housing Choice Voucher Program into a federal entitlement so that every household who qualifies for assistance would receive it. It also aims to prevent discrimination against low-income and veteran renters from potential landlords. It will call for the appropriation of billions of dollars in funding for permanent affordable housing developments and case management services for those experiencing homelessness. In addition, this bill would supply the funding needed for new special purpose Section 8 housing choice vouchers, which are expected to provide an additional 500,000 housing vouchers with a preference for those who are homeless or at risk for being homeless. Next, Representative Cori Bush's Unhoused Bill of Rights declares inalienable rights for unhoused persons and provides solutions to permanently end the homelessness crisis by 2025. Why did she feel the need to have this House resolution introduced? Because she needed this when she was a homeless, working mom of 2, looking to be treated like the person she was. She understood how it felt to be treated less than simply because of being homeless, which most people are forced into, despite popular opinion. She felt overwhelmed with passion regarding homelessness that she slept on the Capitol steps to highlight the end of the moratorium on eviction. The House resolution provides a comprehensive list of more than 30 recommendations to guarantee housing, healthcare, and livable wages for unhoused people, including a call for additional funding for social programs. Not to mention the abolishing of discriminatory policies and practices used to intentionally exclude people that are homeless from accessing services and exercising their rights. It would also call for the Department of Health and Human Services to declare the unhoused crisis a public health emergency. While doing this, the House resolution would provide the protection of unhoused individuals from the violation of their fundamental civil and human rights. More importantly, it calls for the repeal of the Faircloth Amendment, which limits the total number of affordable public housing units that can be built. Along with the declaration of homelessness being a public health emergency, the United States has to acknowledge that housing is a human basic right. And the elected officials moving us in that direction are Representatives Pramila Jayapal and Grace Ming with their bill, the Housing is a Human Right Act of 2021. The bill would authorize much needed funding for crucial housing infrastructure while reducing homelessness across America by investing more than $200 billion in funding for necessary affordable housing and support services. This includes an investment of up to $100 billion for McKinney-Vento Emergency Solutions Grants and $100 billion for Continuum of Care grants. Also, it calls for the creation of a new grant program that would incentivize investments in supporting those that are homeless through humane, evidence-based models on the local level. This grant program would also provide alternatives to criminalization and penalization. I'd now like to direct your attention to an issue that more often than not is the cause of many people being forced into homelessness. With inflation on the rise and interest rates the highest they've ever been, a plethora of people find themselves struggling or unable to keep up with market rent and mortgage rates. There are many ways to address this issue, including raising the minimum wage and guaranteeing universal basic income, but we chose to highlight the need for a Jobs for All Act, because the ability to pay for housing is key to solving homelessness. A national Jobs for All bill would establish financial stability and paid job training, reduce discrimination against the disabled, minorities, and women, and restore housing safety and peace of mind to low-income citizens. The framework for achieving this important piece of legislation includes the support of a 21st century economic bill of rights, the support of S4174, the Wage Theft Prevention and Wage Recovery Act, and last but not least, urging Congress to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. In addition to the Jobs for All Act, we'd like to recommend that the Faircloth Amendment be repealed in the pursuit to end homelessness once and for all. The Faircloth Amendment was a provision of the Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act in 1998, where HUD was barred from funding the construction or operation of new public housing units if the construction of those units would result in a net increase in the number of public housing units as of October 1st, 1999. This simply means that there is a limit to the number of units any public housing authority could own and operate. So there hasn't been any additional units created past that cap that Congress implemented more than 20 years ago. However, the population has continued to grow, and the repeal of this amendment is necessary for the foundational success of ending homelessness for good. By eliminating the physical ban, it becomes a gateway to allowing communities, tenants, and PHAs to reimagine the endless opportunities for families, children, seniors, and single individuals to thrive. Intentionally designing and planning to have public housing integrated within the community, where residents thrive in their neighborhoods and have access to opportunities, jobs, resources, and public parks, can be accomplished. But in order for this to happen, the Faircloth Amendment must be repealed. So in closing, the issues that we amplified, although singularly may not be able to reverse the crisis we are currently dealing with as a country, collectively can make all of the difference needed to restore the United States to its former glory of being the land of opportunity and a country that cares for and protects its own. We're calling on and pleading with Congress to consider passing the Ending Homelessness Act of 2021, the Unhoused Bill of Rights, the Housing is a Human Right Act of 2021, creating a National Jobs for All Act, and repealing the Fair Cloth Amendment. Through the recommendations provided, I am confident that we will be able to end national homelessness sooner rather than later, giving all of our unhoused brothers and sisters a safe and stable place to call home. Thank you for listening.
Adaora, thank you so much. That was a really incredible presentation. We know that there are many other pieces of legislation that will really be needed to end homelessness. We are hopeful that some of what we presented today will pass in this congressional year. So we hope that you'll get your members. If you are a member, we hope you'll join us in this. And we thank you very much. We're going to get to our panel in just a second, but as I said, as members of Congress join us, we'd love to bring them up. And we're about to bring up a member of Congress that has truly been a friend on this issue, who has really worked hard to ensure that there's a place called home for people in America. And we want to thank her for all of her work, but we want to hear her remarks. Please welcome Sheila Jackson-Lee from Texas.
Donald, thank you so very much for your enormous leadership, and thank you to the National Coalition for the Homeless. Adaora, thank you for recounting all the work that should be done. And to my good friend, Joe Segal, and others who are gathered here, part of the infrastructure of leadership of the National Coalition for the Homeless. I have a wonderful presentation, but I'm gonna step in front here and make sure that I'm looking at my phone, because voting is supposed, there it is. And, this is so important that I wanna make sure that I try to give those in the room, and I will come up there in just a moment, the crux of your value, the crux of your value. And to be able to offer the fact that every city in America has homeless persons. And so the question of bringing people home has to be in your DNA, in your soul. It is something that you wake up in the morning, at noon, at evening, and to be honest with you, we as members of Congress should be in the same collaboration as each and every one of you. This morning, I started on the floor of the House citing the Declaration of Independence. So many Americans do not spend time sort of seeping into what that means. And although the nation was not perfect, those of us of African heritage were not even a person, women were not honored, we could not hold property. But the Declaration of Independence said we all are created equal with unalienable rights of life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. And then they followed in the Constitution, imperfect, not perfect, but it said we have organized to create a more perfect union. Are we perfect now? Our work is not done. Our democracy is fraying at the edges. Former presidents are attacking the very essence of the peaceful transfer of power. And there is homelessness in every single corner of our nation. There is something beautiful about a child having a bed or a place to do their homework. Something beautiful about a family being able to gather around their table. And as I joined Congresswoman Cori Bush, as she, out of her heart, laid on the steps of the United States Congress, it couldn't have been a more potent example of the idea of homelessness. As I go throughout my district and see 10 cities, people wanting to have a home and an address, as I encounter homeless veterans, realize that we have not yet met the perfection of this nation. And it is unfair. I lived through and fought my very first fight was to save Allen Parkway in Houston, Texas, which was slated for demolition under the 1998 law. We saved it, demanded it to not be torn down. And that idea that was given, that senseless idea of that we should stop building public housing is why we're in the crisis today. Cabrini Green and large facilities, housing, Instead of cleaning up and pushing up and fixing up, we tore down. And my work in Houston before I came to the United States Congress was to go to public housing and say, this is my home. It's not public housing. This is my home. And we did gardens and grass, and we had people gardening, and we had people believing this is their home. And we saved. We're not the urban centers, but we saved CUNY homes, Kelly Courts, Irvington Village, many of them Allen Parkway in the Congressional District. We turned the eyes of local government. But I am here to say that the advocacy must be a crescendo. We must work as we move in the 21st century to give dignity to people, and that housing is a home if you make it such. To add some of the legislation that has been evidenced, dealing with the national crisis, dealing with the idea of helping the unhoused, recognizing that even if there is a smidgen of people who, because of their mental health status, need a little bit of encouragement and support to get in housing, it is what should be done. I chaired the first committee in Houston, Texas on homelessness. It happened to be dealing with the issue of those with HIV/AIDS. When the opportunities for housing for HIV/AIDS came out, I was proud to chair that committee. We turned it into a committee of fighting for people to get homeless, unhoused, into homes who were homeless. But we also worked with the community impacted by HIV. At that time, those years, it was standoff and handoff. And so as you gather here today, as you spread out for advocacy, may I encourage you to impress upon your DNA the idea that you are never to stop, and as the late John Lewis said, you're never to give in, never to give out, and never to give up. The folk who are out in the rain today are the ones we see on the heating graters that we see in Washington in the cold of the winter. They too deserve housing.
Yes.
They too are America.
That's right. Yes.
As a member of the United States Congress, every single housing bill that comes to the floor, we'll be standing with. And we want to remove that 1998 provision that told housing to stop building. I can assure you, the Biden administration and Secretary Fudge understand the value of causing people to be back in homes who are unhoused and homeless. That's right. But I want to leave you simply with this idea. And it is as we walk the streets, as I visited what we call SRO, I'm a big supporter of that single room occupancy. Because it gets those individuals who cannot come and stand and have 4 children, but are homeless. And then to provide the housing that takes in the families. And then to continue to build some of the work of Habitat for Humanity. Add all these pockets together, but do not deny the usage of taxpayer dollars for the very people who may be homeless now, that have given into this nation, who have put on the uniform, who have shed blood, who are raising families, who are elderly, who have had mental health challenges. Remember what I said? They too, we too are America. And that's why this has to be a crusade. It has to be in the spirit of Reverend Berg, the spirit of the late John Lewis, Martin Luther King, and the spirit of Dolores Huerta, the advocates for immigration rights, the families who are at the border. We must embrace all of them. And as we do so, I can assure you that we will bring down the statistics in cities from Houston to New York to Southern California, Los Angeles. I was just in, and I don't speak ill about any cities. It is not ill. It is to recognize that wherever you are, there are homeless persons. And I hope that as you gather, as I salute the National Coalition for the Homeless, who I've worked with for many, many years, as I salute you and my friend Joe Segal, I know that people like John Conyers are smiling.
That's right.
Barbara Jordan is smiling.
That's right.
Ann Richards is smiling. And Cesar Chavez, all of these folk who had to deal with the vulnerable and the hurt and the pain are glad that we are saying that we will never forget and we will always remember. In this week that we celebrated Juneteenth, that I've seen an implosion of Americans from all backgrounds saying, Juneteenth, happy Juneteenth. I seriously emphasize that it is a day of liberation and freedom. And my purpose for pushing it was to ensure that we would carry that theme forward in America. Well, let me tell you, the homeless need liberating, they need freedom, and they need us.
That's exactly right.
And that is what we should be doing if we are to say, as I will conclude, God bless all of you. God bless the United States of America.
All right.
Another round of applause for Reverend. There are still members of Congress who really are concerned about those who are less fortunate in our country. We're going to move to a phase for our panelists to answer questions. Each one of them has 3 minutes to address the questions that we have. And we're going to start with Dr. Rajni Shankar Brown, who is the board president of the National Coalition for the Homeless. And Dr. Brown, the question for you is, what do you believe are the root causes of homelessness in America?
Thank you so much, Donald, and to everybody who is here today. This is collective work, and it is going to take all of us to bring America home now. There are many root causes of homelessness, but I would say that we have to first look at the intersectional isms that are in the roots: sexism, racism, heterosexism, linguistic imperialism, religious nationalism, ableism, and of course, environmental devastation and degradation. We have a lot of work to be done. Nelson Mandela wisely reminded us, overcoming poverty is not an act of charity. It is an act of justice. Housing is a fundamental human and civil right, and it is a civil and human right that is critical to individual, community, environmental health. Today, we are gathering to call on Congress and our nation to actively invest in comprehensive solutions, long-term housing infrastructure to solve homelessness and the affordable housing crisis. The fact remains the United States is one of the wealthiest nations in the world. We have millions of individuals and families, including children and youth, living without fundamental human rights. It is unacceptable, immoral, inhumane, and criminal. We have more than enough resources to solve this growing and shameful crisis. We need to move beyond greed and have the political and social will to do what is right. I think about how the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a milestone in our world's history, was accepted in 1948, recognizing that safe, stable, affordable housing is a fundamental human right. It is now 2022. Housing as a fundamental human right is protected in the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 11, in the Convention of Rights of the Child, Article 27, Article 5 of the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, Article 14 of the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. We know what we must do. Everyone deserves a house, deserves to have fundamental human rights met. And again, we have more than enough resources to make this happen and to bring America home now. In the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 11, it stresses that we have to make our world more inclusive, more safe, more resilient, and sustainable, specifically through adequate, safe, affordable housing. Lack of housing exists in urban, suburban, and rural communities. Our small rural communities are especially facing unique and serious challenges. We need to immediately stop sweeps, stop the criminalization of homelessness, and also invest in the environment. Even as we are meeting today, heat indexes are rising. Heat-related deaths account for more deaths in the United States than flooding, hurricanes, and tornadoes. And over half of the deaths, half of the loss of precious lives are people experiencing homelessness, including children and youth, our children and youth. As Marian Wright Edelman, founder of the Children's Defense Fund, said, if we do not stand up for our children, we do not stand for much. We need to ensure that people with lived experience are part of decision-making processes, are not only at the table, but are being heard and listened to. The fact is, millions of our brothers, our sisters, our children, fellow human beings, we are not choosing to be in homelessness. Homelessness is not a choice. It is the result of systemic and structural oppression, including the daunting history and realities of poverty, racism, sexism, heterosexism, ableism, linguistic imperialism, environmental racism, and devastation. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and love. Housing and food are fundamental human rights. As the president of the National Coalition for the Homeless and a professor and the Jesse Ball DuPont Chair of Social Justice Education at Stetson University, I work directly with unhoused communities, particularly children and youth experiencing homelessness. Mahatma Gandhi wrote that poverty is the worst form of violence. I see that, feel that every day. It is beyond immoral and unjust. In Florida, where I live, on the very backside of Disney, the happiest place on earth, we have up to 8-10 families piling into one tiny motel room, trying to survive, living in tents in the woods. Each year, we lose precious lives on our streets and encampment sites, living in cars, again, having to weather the weather. Whether it is the freezing conditions in winter in DC or the blazing heat we are now experiencing in Florida and even up north and in the West Coast as well. Children and youth, homelessness directly and adversely impacts physical, mental, social, emotional, and cognitive health. Trauma affects life trajectory and the health of not only individuals, but communities and our nation. And communities of color are disproportionately being impacted. This is a social justice issue that merits our immediate attention and action. This is exactly why we have developed Bring America Home Now and have partners across the landscape of the US joining us in this collective fight to end and prevent homelessness. My mentor, Congressman John Lewis, said, never lose hope, never give up. Well, we will persist and keep pushing because we must. When we say we, the people, we are the we. 57% of people experiencing homelessness reside in 5 states: California, New York, Texas, Washington State, and where I reside, Florida. In Florida, we refer to the state as the Sunshine State, but there's not a lot of sunshine for a lot of people, especially the overrepresented amount of children and youth. We must do better. We are better than this. There are numerous barriers, but the reality is all of these barriers can be removed if there is political and social will and a fusion of movements and comprehensive strategy. Poverty, racism, sexism, ableism, climate degradation, immigration discrimination, gun violence. We have to dismantle intersectional equity issues, which are leading to compounding and perpetuating and growing homelessness. We also need to fix the federal minimum wage, and we need a fair, livable income with our jobs, actively fixing the universal living wage formula, as my dear colleague and friend Richard Troxell has long advised. Also, all the numbers we see are severely underestimated. Any of the numbers that we have even talked about today, because our point in time count is not working. We have to build inclusive systems that work, that actually accurately capture the crisis before us so that we can start to build sustainable solutions. Our nation and communities are in need of dire change, housing, homes, as well as comprehensive services, including mental health support resources. And let me add, we need culturally relevant, equitable supports and resources. People experiencing homelessness need to have their physiological needs met, need to be included in decision-making processes. Dignity and freedom are rooted in our shared humanity. And it calls for revolutionary love, radical empathy, and belonging. Again, I remind all of us that this is collective work. We must focus on advancing legislation, federal comprehensive strategy and solutions that recognize housing as a basic human right, that addresses the severe lack of affordable housing we have in the United States. We need universal health care. We need to ensure a livable wage income for everyone. We need to advance equity in education and ensure everyone has access to high quality education and training, guarantee that civil and voting rights for all, including people experiencing homelessness, is a reality. And as we work to push effective, affordable housing policies forward, we must prioritize racial equity with persistence and intention. Black women, many mothers with children, are disproportionately facing evictions in our nation. Homelessness is surging among our tribal nations and in our Latina, Latino, Latinx communities. Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders are overrepresented in homelessness, 9 times higher than white individuals. In addition, Asian communities are often completely left out of these conversations, although also disproportionately represented. Just look at our Hmong communities, often not captured in counts at all. Donald, you asked such an important question. And I want to say today that federal government and all of us as citizens, as people of the world, we have a civic responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to safe, stable, affordable housing. We are calling for immediate action and genuine investment in housing justice for all. And we can do it. Look at what we are spending on military weapons and war. There is not a lack of resources. There is unfortunately abundant greed and immorality that we must push together to change. It is deeply distressing. Neglect and regressive policies have resulted in over 140 million people living in poverty in the US. 38.5 million children living in poverty, low-income households, just one emergency away from impoverishment. The average taxpayer pays around $2,000 per year in taxes to the Pentagon, but approximately $900 goes straight to weapons contractors. In comparison, only $37 to welfare, $62 to school lunch programs, as our babies do not have access to food. Less than $8 to homeless assistance programs, all while our numbers are surging. This is not okay. We are asking everyone who has joined us today who is listening today to join our Bring America Home Now campaign. This is a grassroots movement. Support the Ending Homelessness Act introduced by Representative Maxine Waters and Congress. We urge you to repeal the Faircloth Amendment. Rent is skyrocketing, average incomes are not, and communities are lacking fundamental human rights. We have to work in moral solidarity. We have to have a fusion of our movements and push for sustainable change. Again, this is collective work. Justice is love in action, and we have to love more fiercely. As Dr. King said, change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability, but comes through continuous struggle. And we must straighten our backs and work for freedom. It is time for us to bring America home now. It is time for us to advance justice in our world and build a world that all of us, especially our children and our youth, deserve. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. We really appreciate your remarks. For the rest of the panel, if we could keep the questions and responses to the answers as brief as you can. We're running out of time here, but we thank you for your patience. We want to talk to the next few people. We talked about the number of different groups that are necessary if we're truly to end homelessness in America. One of the most important groups are people with lived experience. So the next few speakers, I actually have 4 speakers who will share with us their experience having lived through the experience of homelessness in different ways. So our first speaker is Kristina Garcia, who is actually the Vice President of the National Coalition for the Homeless. Please tell us a bit about your experience. And remember, our timekeeper is getting on me here. We have 3 minutes for each response. So Kristina Garcia.
Thank you, Donald. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'll keep it super brief. My name is Kristina Garcia. I currently work at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, serving as the Senior Director of Housing Assistance, overseeing programs serving thousands of people in the Denver metro area. And although I have over 10 years of professional experience fighting to end homelessness, I'm speaking to you today from a personal lens as having experienced homelessness myself. I'm originally from California, where I grew up in the foster care system and ultimately the streets of San Francisco. I experienced chronic homelessness for over 5 years straight. I slept in doorways, stairwells, encampments, and motels if I could scrape up enough money to afford it. Those years I lived on the street were the most impactful years of my life. While living on the street, I was relegated to the fringes of society. I was treated as an animal, and I was blamed for my circumstances. Transitioning from homelessness was equally as challenging as it was made more difficult due to the inhumane treatment I received while living on the street. It was thanks to the incredible housing and supportive services programs and their staff that I was able to escape that nightmare. Through both my personal and professional experience in this field, I can tell you that access to housing, healthcare, employment with livable wages is the solution to end the homelessness crisis we're seeing in this country. People do not choose to be homeless. I never chose to be homeless. And when I was there, I desperately wanted a home. I needed a home. It is a myth that homelessness is a choice. What is true, however, is that homelessness in America is a solvable problem. However, this is going to require Congress to acknowledge this crisis for what it is, an emergency, and act accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristina. Our next panelist, we introduced earlier, but she's going to share both her professional and personal experience, and she is one of the panelists in the room today, and that is Susie Shannon. You go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susie Shannon, and I'm the Policy Director for Housing as a Human Right. I'm also a Health Commissioner for the City of Los Angeles, And on my political end, I'm a member of the Democratic National Committee and the founder and head of our DNC Poverty Council. And I'm also formerly homeless. When I was younger, my family became homeless and we lived in motels. And so I have the lived experience as well. So I live in Los Angeles, which is arguably the homeless capital of the United States. I started working with our unhoused community in 2005 on Skid Row, and that is really ground zero for homelessness. And what I've seen on Skid Row, children rolling backpacks behind them, rats running in the gutter, rats running over people when they're trying to sleep, rats coming down from trees and running into holes in people's tents, garbage strewn streets, and people who literally have nowhere to go because we have half the shelter space for the number of people who are unhoused in Los Angeles. And we have over 41,000 people are homeless in the city of LA and 66,000 who are homeless in the county. And I want to tell you about one guy who I met. Basically, I do a lot of outreach services on Skid Row. And there's one guy who I met, his name was Melvin, and I met him just, handing out blankets, things like that in Skid Row. And every time that I would go to Skid Row, I would visit him. I met him on December 10th, 2021. I remember because it was his birthday. And, I would stop in and, I told them, look, I could probably help you, let me give you my cell phone number and, just give me a call and let me know like what's going on. So one time when I visited him, I went home, and when I got home, I got a call from him asking me if I had gotten home safely. I literally have friends who would not call me and do that. And so I always tell this story because too often we dehumanize or put a number on people who are unhoused, and we really need to stop doing that because it is detrimentally keeping us from actually helping people. Melvin now is living in one of the hotels that was funded through COVID relief. He now has Section 8 voucher. We're hoping to get him into permanent housing soon. And what I want to basically tell you is that there are some really shocking statistics I could give you. In Los Angeles, we have 70,000 vacant units. We have enough vacant units right now to house every single person who is homeless in the county of Los Angeles. We are not utilizing those units. That's one thing that is very important. In every city that I go to, I am seeing vacant buildings and vacant units that we can utilize through a program called master leasing. In fact, I work for an organization that is part of AIDS Healthcare Foundation, and we have housed 1,400 people in the last 3.5 years by buying up vacant buildings, converting them into permanent housing and housing people through a program that provides for Section 8 and other programs to help subsidize people getting in. 16% of the people who are homeless in Los Angeles are homeless for reasons other than mental illness, drug or alcohol addiction. It's very important, particularly for people who are very young in the room today, for you to understand that utilizing stereotypes that we see in media, in film, and television is very detrimental to policy. You have to know the population that you're helping, and you have to know that drug and alcohol problems and mental health problems sometimes surface because people are homeless. And it's not a reason that they become homeless. And it's very important, like, I am a Housing First advocate. I'm also the drafter of our Housing First legislation for the state of California, SB 1380, authored by Holly Mitchell. And we basically have shown that not only do we save a lot of money by utilizing Housing First, but it is the key way to stabilize folks. So I'm going to give you 6 ways right now that you can help end homelessness. And these work, I know, because I'm on the ground working with people who are unhoused. I work on national policy and I work on state policy. Number 1, we absolutely must pass Maxine Waters' I Need Homelessness Act. We need those vouchers. We have over 500,000 people who are homeless, as you've seen. Number two, we need to lift the ban on rent control in a lot of these states. Where I live, you have to live in a building built in 1978 or before in order to have rent control. In New York, you have to live in a building that was built in 1974 or before to have rent control. Rents are skyrocketing. People cannot afford to live. In Manhattan, you have to make about $160,000 a year to not be rent burdened, but the cost of housing has risen to $4,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. People can't afford to live. The Rent Guidance Board in New York just voted to raise rents on rent-controlled units up to 5%. I was at that hearing that said 2 years. People said they cannot afford that rent increase. A lot of those folks are going to end up homeless unless we have some kind of relief for them. Three, social housing. So we have a social housing bill in California that Alex Lee, who is an assembly member, is authoring. And this is a way for the government to build housing and to provide housing and mixed income development. And that actually can go a long way in helping. We have lost hundreds of thousands of units in public housing, and we have lost a lot, like tens of thousands of units in SROs. And we need to be building that back. I think that on the building end of things, we need to build more housing for people who are homeless. But we need to do that utilizing prefab modular housing. So in Los Angeles, the cost to build housing has skyrocketed to $500,000, $700,000 a unit for a 400 square foot unit of housing for people who are unhoused. It's outrageous. You could buy a condo and give people a couple $100,000 for what we spend for one unit. So we're asking that we build, but do that in a very smart way so we can get the most value and to build utilizing prefab modular housing. We also need to obviously use adaptive reuse and utilize all of our vacant units. And I think, what we're facing is a real crisis. There are 1,500 people who died on the streets of Los Angeles last year. As a health commissioner, I am doing everything I can to look at every single solution here to homelessness. So I hope that everyone here understands permanent housing is really the way to do it, giving people an avenue to get into permanent housing, whether it's building it, utilizing vacant units, making sure that we have almost no barriers for people moving from the streets and homelessness. I have done it. I'm asking you to do this, to go back to your bosses, to do your research, but we can do this. The state of Utah is the only state that's reached a functional zero in chronic homelessness. They didn't do it through enforcement or criminalization. They did it one way, which was to provide permanent, affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Susie, thank you so much. And I really appreciate everybody who's sticking with us. I know we're over time. I thank all of our speakers who have stayed through the course. We did go a little bit over, but we really appreciate all of you sticking with it. I'm going to announce the next three speakers. And the question for them is, what could we do? What would be the impact of the Waters Ending Homelessness Bill with its 500,000 to 1 million unhoused low-income people receiving housing vouchers? So the next three panelists are someone who operates housing, but is also the vice president, the financial chair of LULAC, and that would be Mr. James Fukuda, followed by Mr. Steve Berg. Steve Berg works at the National Alliance to End Homelessness, one of our partners. I believe Sarah Sadian may have left, but if she hasn't, she'll follow Steve, followed by Dr. Lamont Green. So James, if you want to come up and tell us what would happen if we got those housing dollars as a housing provider.
Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Representative Waters for making this space available to us. And I hope that everyone here will vote for her bill to add 500,000 vouchers. Very simply, what it'll do, since we're running out of time, just acquired a building, 24 units. The rent per unit is $850, and that's a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. That is too cheap to even pay the real estate tax on the individual unit in the city of New York. So getting housing Section 8 vouchers on there will allow us to rehabilitate the units up to a standard that the Department of Buildings considers to be a B+, A- inspection, and provide heat, air conditioning, and make sure that the windows and roofs are watertight and airtight. That's the effect. You're going to bring a lot of substandard units up to par.
Awesome, and I want to congratulate you for being the first person to stick to their time today. Our next speaker is Mr. Steve Berg, who's the Vice President of the National Alliance to End Homelessness.
Thanks, Donald, and I'll try to be the second person. When I read Representative Chairwoman Waters' bill on this, I get so excited. I've been doing this for a while now. You might be able to tell from looking at me. And what's become clear is a couple of things. What's the main thing that's preventing progress on homelessness is just resources. Housing costs money. Housing costs money. Whoever owns it, however it's being built, it costs money to build. And the programs that exist for housing aren't conceived of as programs where everybody who needs the help gets the help. Unlike programs like the SNAP program for food or the Medicaid program for Medicaid, where everybody who's eligible gets the help. But the housing programs, a quarter of the people who are eligible get housing, everybody else goes on a waiting list. This is a situation that not only brings about homelessness, it brings about discouragement, despair on the part of people who are experiencing homelessness. People who are working to end homelessness share that despair, and it's time for it to stop. It really is time for it to stop. And that's why it's very exciting to see legislation like this in the hopper. And we are 100% behind working with the National Coalition of the Homeless on getting this legislation passed. So thank you all very much for it.
Thank you so much, Steve. Our next speaker, we said we would have people, very impressive people who have actually gone through this, come out the other side, and become powerful advocates. The next gentleman, Dr. Lamont Green, from the Seattle King County Coalition for the Homeless, now actually the Washington State Coalition for the Homeless, is one of the most impressive people I've ever met, and you will enjoy hearing from him, Dr. Lamont Green. And following him, we'll have Neli Vazquez, and we'll end it with Joel John Roberts from PATH. So Dr. Green.
Thank you, Donald. You're so kind. And to members of Congress and staff and the Bring America Home Now partners, it is an honor and privilege to be with you all here today. And my name is Lamont, and I'm really proud to be a part of the NCH Board of Directors. And I'm also co-chair of the Washington State Lived Experience Coalition, which is a by us, for us coalition of people who are currently experiencing homelessness and who have experienced homelessness. And we co-architected the new King County Regional Homeless Authority in Seattle, Washington. And I'm also the DEI director for the Technical Assistance Collaborative, also known as TAC, which is a policy nonprofit. And we are a technical assistance provider and consulting provider for HUD, the VA, and other state and local governments across homelessness, behavioral health, human services, and equity. I would just like to share a little bit about how I got here. I'm a descendant of the Gullah Geechee people from the Low Country Sea Islands of South Carolina, where I was born. I have lived in Tacoma, Washington for about 25 years. And as a young man, after service in naval military intelligence as a Russian and Chinese cryptologic technician and interpretive, I became homeless, depressed, and drug addicted, struggling with my own internalized demons resulting from living in a society that constantly gaslit me into believing that due to my skin color and sexual orientation, that I'm not good enough, I do not belong, and I am powerless. While living homeless and struggling with depression and substance use on the streets of San Francisco and Fresno, a failed suicide attempt landed me at a pilot program at American Lake Veterans Hospital in Lakewood, Washington. And the rehabilitative program was designed for veterans experiencing homelessness and mental health issues. And it really centered on spiritual, emotional wellness, art therapy, fishing, meditation, and lots of talk and group therapy. And I remember the first time arriving to the Pacific Northwest and really being in awe of the beauty. And for this reason, I call the Puget Sound area home, a place of hope and healing, transformation and possibility. And luckily, by the grace of God and being a Persian Gulf War era veteran status, there were services available to help support my recovery. However, this is not the case for many people in our community. Black, brown, indigenous, LGBTQ, two-spirit folks, disabled folks living with complex mental health needs are tremendously overrepresented in our homelessness system. And all of us have been talking about these generational impacts of systemic oppression, intersecting with racism, heterosexism, transphobia. And unfortunately, programs that work, like the one that saved my life, are often the first to go during draconian budget cuts. The past 4 decades of trickle-down economics and neoliberal policies have eroded social safety nets, leading to the homelessness crisis we see today. Together, I believe we can create a community and where there is a universal access to housing and medical care, developed by and centering communities most impacted. And this is why the Bring America Home Now campaign is both urgent and critical. Dr. King once stated, "Too often being homeless is considered a moral failing when it's actually a structural and political problem that makes visible the growing inequalities of our society." And this inequality that Dr. King was so committed to changing into racial equity and social justice is so important. With growing homelessness and the biases surrounding our unhoused neighbors, we often pathologize our unhoused neighbors while forgetting the persistent drivers of inequity, steeped in the root causes of indigenous invisibility, anti-Black racism, and ableism. And as HUD Secretary Fudge said, we cannot sweep or ban our way out of homelessness. And we must remember, it's not a mistake that Black people have consistently remained overrepresented in homelessness. It isn't a mistake that individuals identifying as a Latino, Latinx, are about 22% of the homeless population. It is not by mistake that in 2019, Native Americans had the largest increase of people experiencing homelessness. And we know why. Income inequality and lack of economic ability, racial wealth gap, lack of affordable housing development, and the history and legacy of anti-Black housing policies. And so I just beg you all, I beg Congress to act now to solve and end homelessness. I beg Congress to pass a national homeless bill of rights that are co-developed by people with lived experience of homelessness from racially marginalized and historically disenfranchised communities most impacted, because we know that those closest to the problem are closest to the solutions, but are often overlooked and devalued. And I beg Congress, please repeal the Fair Cloth Amendment. And I beg Congress to pass Representative Maxine Waters' Ending Homelessness Act. And lastly, I beg Congress to support the Bring America Home Now campaign. Housing, jobs, and healthcare must be fundamental human and civil rights. Thank you.
Wow, just an amazing presentation, Dr. Green. I'll call him Dr. Green. We have to give him credit for that work he did to get that title. But thank you so much for your words. We really appreciate you. Couple more people left. We have 2 people on our panel who actually work to create housing, and they're going to share with us what, in their opinion, is the most affordable housing policies that they work within their communities. And our first speaker is Neli Vazquez from Chicago. Neli?
Hi, Hello, everyone. Thank you, Don, Joel, all of my colleagues have spoken here today. So much has been said. What I'd like to add is basically our own experience in building an organization from scratch, starting back in 1994. As my husband and I worked in the field of finance, started on a journey to try to do our part to give back and make a difference for people specifically that were suffering from substance abuse issues. Like many families, our own family had been impacted at one time. To refresh everyone's memory, back in 1994, things were happening that were really criminalizing the issue of substance abuse. Another thing that was happening is health insurance companies were cutting back on the 28-day treatment programs. That raised alarms in our heads, and knowing that if it wasn't for the grace of God, right, and knowing that we had the resources and the insurance and the coverage and all the support systems to ensure that we didn't end up, in catastrophic situations, which often are the causes of homelessness, that, we would have been and at that, in that situation ourselves. So it didn't take long for us to realize that these decisions were being made with strengthening the laws to criminalize and incarcerate people that were suffering from these issues. And the fact that they no longer, even if they had insurance, had coverage that would cover more than a couple of detox days. We started on a journey to look at what were the options in terms of the charitable services that were out there back in 1994 and also the public services that were being offered. And while many were well-intended, we found that many of them were very siloed, very fragmented, and very disjointed, in addition to the public sector and the criminal justice system being very draconian. So in our business, we were taught to follow the money, right? So we realized that we were planning for failure, and we weren't planning for success in any way that ultimately would lead people that ended up in these unfortunate, desperate situations to a path of sustainable self-sufficiency. So to make a long story short, my husband and I just started doing some research on our own to find out what we could do different in a way that aligned with our values. We wanted people to have a place to live where there was no time limit. They didn't have to leave at 7 in the morning, where they did have 3 healthy meals a day, where you, your family, your children can all heal together under one roof. It wasn't going to be fragmentizing populations or demographics based on age or race or gender, but really helping people from all walks of life. Today, we have what is considered one of the most vertically integrated models that by design helps people get access to transitional housing where they can live for as long as it takes, get access to a multidisciplinary team of professionals that are trained as behavioral healthcare specialists, educators, workforce development specialists, job placement, career placement individuals, as well as housing placement specialists. All of this happens under one organization that allows us to create the seamless continuum of care. We trademarked the term housing is healthcare because at every facet of the work that we do involves having housing. Of course, no one can heal from any type of ailment if they don't have a place to live. One of the things I'm most proud of too is the fact that our staff is represented by about 35% of the population that formerly were homeless within our own organization, right? That today are working, they're leaders, they're educated, and they're professionals in their field today, leading many of my departments. Today, we take people from the criminal justice system, from the VA, from the Department of Family Services from the city of Chicago. So we're funded by public agencies, almost all city, county, and federal levels. We also work with philanthropic communities to align and leverage public and private resources. And we also have social enterprises that are created to be transitional employment places for people with barriers to employment. We also have a portfolio of transitional, supportive, affordable, senior, and veteran housing that allows people to seamlessly move to the appropriate level of housing once their services obviously have completed in one phase of their housing and services here at A Safe Haven to the next stage, into the next stage, into their ultimately independent and self-sufficient. We're grateful that since we started back in 1994, we have had over 135,000 people come through our programs. And not everyone makes it, but the vast majority of them do. And for the individuals that don't make it the first time, our doors are always open for us to welcome them a second time and give it another shot. We know that the disease of addiction oftentimes is a process and it takes a few times. Being through it, having been through it, we understand. So for us, the goal is today, hopefully with all of the people that have spoken so passionately and so well in terms of so many of the reasons why people are homeless, it's not a homogeneous population. There's no one way to solve homelessness. But the good news is there are many ways that have been proven to work, and we must look at them in the landscape of what we need to do right now. It is an urgent issue. A couple of recommendations I have is we have to define homelessness as a public health issue. During the pandemic, I was able to introduce a bill here in the state of Illinois, HB 3949, that has now passed unanimously in the House and the Senate, that helps elevate homelessness to be part of the critical public health infrastructure. Why did we do that? Because we realized during the pandemic, while the CARES Act funding came to every city and every state to give resources to those that were dealing on the front lines of homelessness, which was healthcare organizations and nursing homes, homeless organizations did not qualify because we were not considered part of the public health critical infrastructure. Well, today we've opened that window. We hope that this becomes a national idea that can be supported. The next thing is we need HUD to support building capacity for transitional and supportive housing. The first step is transitional because we do need to provide those wraparound services. We need to understand, we need to create those, we have to have those assessments, we have to coordinate those services under an umbrella that is by design able to meet all the social determinants of health. So now we know, we have informed decisions, we know where to put them in their next phase of housing. That's where supportive housing comes in. Many people need help on a temporary basis and an ongoing basis until they're ready to get back on their feet. Some may need it permanently. During the pandemic, we were fortunate to have built over 255 units, 150 of them veteran housing, and the rest were senior housing. And we were grateful for the support and partnership with HUD and the VA to have accomplished those goals. So finally, I want to say that we need consistent funding. The idea of funding homeless providers on a grant basis, on a one-year contract basis, is not sustainable, and it does not foster growth of successful programs. What we need is health insurance. So one of my reasons for getting homelessness to be introduced to be part of the public health care infrastructure is because we see it's a public health care issue, but unless we have consistent funding, such as if you have a broken arm, you get to go to the emergency room, it's covered by your insurance and by Medicaid. We need the same thing for mental health and behavioral health and for homelessness. We need to have access to those Medicaid resources and benchmark the funding for homeless organizations and treat us as the healthcare providers that we truly are. So I think this is an opportunity. The pandemic is going to be a bookmark, I think, in our nation's history. The pandemic highlighted and not only exacerbated the problem, but it highlighted the gaps in the system. And if we don't take these lessons that we learned and apply them in a way that it helps us close those gaps, in a way that's going to prevent homelessness, right? And address it as it happens and move towards healing it by building what truly should be a human infrastructure that includes access to behavioral health care services, education, employment, and housing services, then we missed the opportunity because we can no longer say we didn't know that homelessness was a problem. We can no longer say that we didn't have the funding, because today every city, every state has funding to reimagine the delivery system. And we choose today, what we choose today will determine the future of the infrastructure that we will, I guess, leave to the next generation. And my hope today is that we do what's needed in terms of investing in what works. But thank you so much. everyone. This
Thank-
is very inspiring.
Thank you very much. Great job, Neli Vazquez. And we're almost finished, but last but not least, we have an incredible provider, one of the biggest in the country, as a matter of fact. He is from the Los Angeles area, very appropriate because of our sponsorship today. But we are now going to hear from Joel John Roberts, who is the Executive Director of Path Ventures.
Hello from California. I'm the other Joel. It's my honor to be here. I'm the CEO of Path Ventures. For the last 25 years, I've been the CEO of Path. We work in 161 cities in California. We actually serve 20% of all of California's homeless population. In the last 10 years, we've raised $1.2 billion of capital funding just for supportive housing. And we have 1,200 staff people across California, from San Diego to Orange County to Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Silicon Valley, San Jose. And I just quickly want to share with you the voice of the frontline workers. If you ask them, what do they need? They would simply say, we need more homes. We just need more homes. In the first year of COVID, they set up 13 interim and permanent homeless and housing facilities just to respond to COVID. And they keep saying we need more homes. The problem is that we're just encountering so many barriers. The people who are complaining about the people on the streets are the same people who fight us when we try to build a building or build a facility in their neighborhood. We need to overcome that NIMBYism. Local jurisdictions are just turning to not homes, but to criminalizing homelessness. So they think sweeping or arresting is going to solve the problem, and it's not. And it just takes away the resources towards building more homes. And finally, we see the barrier of racial inequity, that the disproportionate number of people of color on our streets, that we're not getting the right people into our homes that we're building. So I would just end it this way. I think very simple, even though homelessness is a complicated issue. And to me, the voices of the people on the streets and the voices of the frontlines workers are saying we need more homes, which means we need more resources, and we need to overcome these barriers that are not allowing us to build more of these homes. So if you just end this with this, the voices of the streets and the voices of the frontline workers are saying we need more homes, and whatever it takes, whatever law or funding or resources or policies it takes, we just need more homes. Thank you.
So much, Joel. And I neglected to mention that Joel John Roberts is actually our newest NCH board member. So bringing a lot of very important, powerful, and committed people to the National Coalition. Actually, James Fukuda asked for, he wanted to retake his time. And so he's going to come back up just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on.
I promise I'll be quick, but I just wanted to give you some hard statistics. You want to know how to get homeless off the streets? I agree, house them. But here's the problem. Right now, today, I have two 100,000 square foot buildings going up in the Bronx, New York. One is market rate. One is 80-20 that has 25%, 30% AMI for those of you who are into the statistics. But in other words, 30% are deeply, deeply affordable housing, right? $425 a month for a studio apartment in New York City. Here's the problem. Real estate is a business of cost per square foot. It is costing me $7.58 per square foot more to get zoning and entitlements for the affordable housing project than the market rate project. You guys are all legislators. That's something legislators can do. And let me just finish by saying housing first. You hear about the cascading domino of different problems that people have who live on the street. If you want to know what to do, if you want to know how to follow your heart, think of it this way. Whether they did it to themselves, whether society did it, whether it was just bad luck, somehow or other, they have lost their self-respect, and society has to help them get it back. Thank you.
So James, thank you very much. And we would also like to thank James for sponsoring your lunch today. So if you had a good day, James is responsible. So once again, I want to thank all of you that stayed the entire course of our briefing today. We hope you got some valuable information from all of the magnificent speakers that were here today. And we hope most of all that you take away today that we can end homelessness. We can solve this issue, but we must do it together. Each one of us must do whatever we can in our sphere of influence to make the difference, to change the course of homelessness in America. So I thank you all for coming today. Please tell your member, your organization, your family, whoever needs to hear this message that we can end homelessness and we can bring America home now. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped. What are your next steps?
Well, I think we need to talk to more members of Congress about how important affordable housing is in their communities. We've got people who use these programs in every community, and in every community we've got people who need these programs and can't get the help because there's not enough funding in the program. This is a issue that goes beyond politics and just should be one of basic human needs. And that's what we need more members of Congress to understand.
There's not going to be one solution to ending homelessness, especially because there wasn't one specific instance that brought us to the point that we are, where homelessness is such a problem. But collectively, all of the things that we've mentioned today can play their part and go the distance and really make all of the difference that's needed in ending homelessness in America once and for all. And we ask for the support of the Ending Homelessness Act of 2021, along with the other supporting bills, because together we can end homelessness.
This was a great first step. I felt like major organizations like LULAC, one of the largest Latino civil rights organizations, NAACP, healthcare is a human right. There's probably several thousands of organizations that are ready to pass Maxine Waters' End Homeless Act. And this briefing was sort of the shot over the bow. This is our, we're coming to Congress. We're petitioning Congress to end homelessness. And we have an army of people who are ready as a first step to pass this bill, the Ending Homeless Act, which is 500,000 housing vouchers up to 1 million. In the next year. And so, this is a real major step forward. And I'm excited because there's so many people across the country, they want housing, they need housing, and it's real simple. We gotta house people, provide jobs, and we're gonna win, but we need a grassroots movement in the Congress, outside the Congress, and then we will win. I haven't met too many people who don't think a baby or a child should be housed, or a senior citizen or a veteran or a family. It's just that you gotta, in a democracy, you've got to advocate, and that's what we're doing, but thank you.
Don't give up hope. We are working hard for you every day. Our work here on the Hill is part of it, but we do a lot more in the community. If your community is criminalizing you, look out, we'll be there. We're going to be on the ground. We're going to be mobilizing people. And we truly believe that Bring America Home Now is not just a slogan. It's going to actually happen, but we need your help. We need you to get involved in the advocacy as well. One of the things that keeps us from moving forward is we don't have enough people who care about this issue. And those that are that the issue is affecting, we really need you on our side. So we want to hear your voices. Yesterday, I'll just say this, there was a piece of legislation that was actually introduced by HUD, and that piece of legislation is to address homelessness for people who are living on the street today. And guess what? It gave you some power. So in your community, if your community gets this money, you have to sign off on it. So get involved. We'll get you the information about this. We'll have it on our next our next call for the National Coalition, our town hall. We're going to bring in a HUD official. We're going to let you know how you can shape the plan for ending homelessness in your community. But most of all, once again, do not give up hope. Thank you very much.
The National Coalition for the Homeless has been around for many years, and we're a group that has been dedicated from day one to ending homelessness. And it's an organization that is inspirational, transformational. It's there in the streets, it's there in Congress. So we're a place to look to if you're looking to get involved, if you're looking to get some knowledge, if you're looking to get some hope. So check us out on our Facebook, Instagram, all the social media. Get involved with the Bring America Home Now campaign.